Well, I mean, how would I define the word? I guess I wouldn't. I guess I'd just look at the dictionary. In terms of composing with words, yeah. I mean, what I really do is I compose with English, and in terms of the smaller subword units I use, they're really very much derived from English. So it's not like a Zaum thing where I would be inventing a word. It's more basically using English, and not even consciously, but using the English language and English words, and either using words or basically jumbling elements of a given word around, or going into more phonemic levels of language.
Do you remember the origin of the coming of some of those words that aren't words in the dictionary? I mean, for instance, is something, do you remember when something was a fragment or other options?
Yeah, I mean, I can look at some sort of neologisms or nonce words, as some other people call them, and I can pretty basically identify the root of what that was, but not always. And especially with the earlier work I did, even earlier than Ocker or Platten, I don't remember where that stuff came from. I have no idea where that, and it was not that I was stoned. I don't remember where that stuff came from. But with the later stuff, like with Ocker, I can pretty much, a lot of times I can see what word base I was getting at, the non-word form.
And do the words come from a system, or are they more intuitive?
No, very little. I mean, the only basically, especially in that period, and we're talking about from 76 to 82, I guess. It might be I would read a word and just sort of toy with it. Like when our son was an infant and we were staying with his parents, I was reading a lot of Dashiell Hammett, and I can remember just tearing some words apart of Dashiell Hammett and just reconstructing words out of that. There's never been any system in terms of generating the language. There has been a lot of system in generating the structure that language appears in. But in terms of the actual language, no. Sure. I mean, well, minimal art was a big influence, as was some weird abstract expressionism. And just as the sort of overall generic principle involved in that, I was interested in getting away from standard terms of organization for poems or short stories, because it didn't seem to me that that's what I was doing. I wasn't trying to make a narrative. I wasn't trying to leave the reader with some sort of image or mood or something like that. I wasn't interested in that. And it seemed to me that if I wasn't going to do that, I shouldn't be working with paragraphs per se. I shouldn't be working with verses. So I thought, really at that point, when I decided to sort of leave that behind, there were either two choices: don't have any sort of organizational structure to things, so just have a page full of words, or find out how you're going to organize things. So to me, the way I looked at things in terms of organization was shape. So minimal sculpture and some paintings that might be considered minimalist as well. They presented me with a rather ready-made way of shaping things. And you'll see, and it's sort of made a comeback, but in early works, I guess in the very late 70s and early 80s, I would actually have sort of things that looked like a Ronald Blayton sculpture. And then I'd have this linguistic filler in it, you know. Because I didn't want to get to the point, I didn't want to approach language as just stuff that was just there on a page, because to me that seemed too anarchic, and I thought it was important to have some sort of alternate structure to narrative carriers, basically, sentence, paragraph, verse. So yeah, I mean, that was a very big way of looking at organization for me, was visually. And even earlier, I mean, when we were talking before, you mentioned Greenberg, and Greenberg was a very big influence in the way I looked at language. Because Greenberg's thing was, and quite apart from his politics, that whole question, just aesthetically, he basically proposed that what painting was getting rid of unnecessary conventions. You know, get rid of the canvas, get rid of dimensionality, if that's a word. If it isn't, I just made up another word. His thing was basically, it's flat, it's images, flat images. And that's sort of what I tracked in what I was doing from the stage of writing, you know, fairly standard surrealist poems even. And then going to more sentence phrase based work, and then wheeling it down further. Okay, we're not going to have paragraphs, we're not going to have sentence structures necessarily. So Greenberg was very much a key to me in going in that direction. So I would say, yeah, minimalist art was big in terms of organizational approaches to getting stuff on the page. And even earlier than that, abstract expressionism, and more importantly, criticism about abstract expressionism was important to basically getting away from what I conceived as, I guess, prejudicial structures in terms of what I was writing. Yes and no. It's just something I say a lot. I like to think it's because I'm a dialectician, but it might be just because I can't make up my fucking mind. Yes, in terms of visually, the work is very closed, I think. Typically, there are defined structures in the work I do, and obviously the flip side of that is there's a lot of space. So my work on the page is it's a very discrete, almost object-like thing on the page. So it is, in that sense, it's very closed. In another sense, along those lines, basically I'll usually have some sort of structuring system which also lends closure to the work. It can't go on and on forever, like a poet we know, Lynn Dryer, said, well, this could have gone. She was talking about her own work, this could go on forever, you know. I just get tired or something, it doesn't go on forever. So in that sense, it's closed. In terms of, that's just the production mode. In terms of the reception mode, I think it's extremely open work. In terms of how a reader might approach, for instance, what I read today, this afternoon, how they might approach it, it's very open. I mean, my work is very non-directional. So in that sense, I think it's an extremely, what I do is extremely open. I mean, I wouldn't claim ownership over any particular interpretation of what I do, for instance. So in that sense, it's not closed, it's open. But having said that, I can see why Doug might say that, because for from the production angle and from what, especially with my recent work, it's very structured. It's not open field, for instance.
Yeah, it's just struck me as we've been talking that there's that marriage between sort of abstract expressionism and minimal systems that is locked in place, especially something like Roscoe Mitchell, but presumably then if the words are intuitive, that needs to open readings from anyone that comes to it. But I also have read a lot about political leanings in your work. I think that's a question I want to in a second. The way I read the first way I read it is always on an aesthetic level. I don't know if that's if you have a primary purpose for your work, talking about whether you want to, you seem to be sort of conveying that you don't want it to be read. You don't want it to be read in such and such a way, and it is very democratic.
Yeah, well, from the way, like I say, from the way it's produced, and it is very structured and therefore closed. I mean, it's important that it be a shape at the most basic level. And it's important that there be stuff outside of that, because that's what shapes are. And that's what objects are, in a sense. In a way, it's sort of the antithesis of what was being talked about before about relational. I don't want to say that. There's a sense in which I don't think of my work as relational. I don't have that sense that's reaching out to other things, although I might deny that if I think about it. Yeah, they do. I think politics is a rough word, especially now, because in a sense everything is political. So in that sense I would say it would be impossible not to write something that was politically informed. But basically whatever you're doing is the product of some sort of political bias, whether conscious or otherwise. On the other hand, I think it's an overused term. I don't think that the politics of the text is the same as politics in the street. And increasingly, initially, a lot of the few things I would write that were sort of discursive would be involved with ideology and in terms of what that meant in terms of narrative and stuff like that. And I think, to a large extent, most people identify me with that because some of that stuff has appeared in anthologies. But increasingly, I've sort of been moving away from that because I think it's easy for cultural workers to say, well, we're involved in ideological structure and then just do that and not actually get involved in some sort of concrete political issues. Now I'm going to answer what the question was. I know this was very directly, as an overview.
So, do political beliefs inform your work?
Yeah.
I guess. No, I'm not going to lead you on it.
Yeah, well, yeah, they do to that extent. I guess the answer is yes, but do I? I guess what I'm a little wary about is, do I want my political beliefs to inform a reading of it? And I think the answer, if you can see that difference. But yeah, I mean, I'm a very political being. I've done a lot of political work. A lot of my work is a reaction to certain kinds of writing that are politically and ideologically invested, and I've reacted against those. In one way, one of the reasons why my work has become increasingly structured and increasingly system-driven is sort of a reaction to anarchism. In other words, I do believe politically that we need organizations, we need political parties to accomplish actual change. And one of the reasons why I started structuring things was also that I thought that was, I did a work called Uneven Development, and the title in and of itself might lead one to believe that there was some sort of Marx malice stuff behind the background, and there was, but what I was interested in was sort of creating the page in terms of a layer which would very loosely translate into your class system, in a very loose sense. But increasingly, I've looked at the macro structure of what I do as the political element in terms of the piece's production, and as the organized political structure, the party structure. Let's just make it simple. And I've looked at the micro level as very anarchistic in the sense that people can dip into that and come up with whatever they choose, just like we were talking before. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I can understand.
It's sort of like a dual track system, but it's important to me that. So the answer is yes. My work is very political. To go back to that, I mean, even talking about that, yes, the answer is politics is extremely conditions what I'm doing. Well, I guess you get used to it. And I guess as well, it's good to have opposition because it sort of defines where you're at. It's good to have some pushback. But I think early on, it was pretty apparent to me that even in being at least sociologically and in terms of footnotes, part of something that was happening, that what I was doing was basically on the fringes, and you get used to it. That's the simple answer.
Is it exciting? Is it exciting to be on the fringes? Do you think?
Well, I'm too old to be excited now, but yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of juice that you get from it.
I think I'm always drawn to
yeah, and I mean, it feels good. It feels good to be on the fringes of what's mainstream, because mainstream is not so hot, and that is not to put down people whose work might be a little less extreme than mine. That's a lot of people, and some people of whom I like their work very much. So I'm not saying that you're either with me or against me at all, but it's important that people be working and trying to push things a little further. Push the edges out a little further. So yeah, I feel good about that. Well, the last question is the easiest for me to answer, but I'll go sequentially. Yeah, no, I didn't have much choice in the matter. I was an English student. I got out of college during the Vietnam War. I was not going to be an academic. That was for a variety of reasons. I mean, temperamentally, I didn't want to be an academic, but there was no choice involved in it for me. So I had to be honest about that. I know I've, in various venues, said some very anti-academic things, but my being part of the academy was not a choice. It's just where I was at. And working low-rent clerical jobs and doing stuff like that, just to scuffle by with wife and son, and having to chip in some money. So that was never an issue. In terms of strategy and being a non-academic, I guess it ties into the easier answer. Being a non-academic totally enabled what I do. There's no way I could have been writing, I believe, writing what what I'm writing and keep any kind of academic credit. And that became part of the strategy, I guess, was part of that was, okay, the strategy is, okay, this is going to allow me to do whatever the fuck I want to do, because, you know, it's just not going to be that, it's not going to be a crowd pleaser, so that made things easier. So the strategy was to sort of, okay, this is where I'm at, so let's keep pushing this further afield. And the last question, could I have been doing what I was doing and be an academic? I don't think so. I could be wrong. I know I've said some things about academic poetry and been corrected by people who know more about it than I do, actually, because I really don't know what goes on very much in the academy. But I find it hard to believe that I could be writing if I had an academic post, or at the very minimum I would have to spend huge amounts of time explicating it, so it could be sort of parsed into some sort of literary sociology. And that, I think, that in and of itself would have sort of deflated what I'm doing. I know I've written some discursive pieces, and I think it takes a lot of energy. And so, yeah, no, I don't think I could have been doing what I was doing in terms of having an academic challenge.